All right. Well, thanks so much for having me. All right, cool. I can control this with my phone. That's pretty neat. Well, thanks for having me. I'm the campaign manager for the campaign Save the Boundary Waters, and I'll talk a little bit more about myself. But yeah, I've been running through all the trails in the Boundary Waters for quite a while, and I'd also done Superior. And I think I saw this at one of the beginnings of it, and I was looking into that, and then I saw the part of the band, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. I hadn't signed up to be a member, and I was somewhere in between Snowbank Lake and Disappointment Lake, if you know the area of the wilderness. And I hit a spot when you're running by yourself in the wilderness, and I run unplugged, so I'm not listening to anything, so it's just in my head, which can be a scary place to be sometimes. But it just hit me. I was like, I should sign up. This is great. So I literally in the Boundary Waters on trail just went to did it and signed up. So this is kind of a cool story. Anyway, so yeah, Alex Falconer. A little bit about me. I've got my wife and 3 kids. We spend as much time in the Boundary Waters as we can. Besides work and running, I'm a night sky junkie. So whenever we get northern lights, I will frequently, by living in Prairie, drive up north and paddle into the wilderness and find a spot to take pictures of the northern lights. And as my job for Campaign Save the Boundary Waters, I campaign manager, but my main focus is our federal and state legislation. And so this is a picture of me from the Capitol, and I rarely wear a tie, but when I do, it has canoes on it, so I'm appropriately themed. So just the Boundary Waters itself, I'll just do a very basic thing. If anybody has any questions about what our campaign is up to, the threat, etc., I know way more than I'm going to talk about right here. The Boundary Waters is 1.1 million acres of wilderness located just right at the border of Minnesota and Canada. It's perfectly pristine, it's wonderful, it's quiet, it's silent, there's no human infrastructure except for fire grates and latrines. And the typical way that most people traverse the Boundary Waters is by paddling your canoe and all of your gear and your portage in between lakes. That's not what I did for my project, obviously, but yeah, and I guess the thing about the problem that we're facing right now is that there's a proposal for a giant sulfide or copper mine to be built right on the southern border of the wilderness. Sulfide ore mines pollute 100% of the time. In the United States, they're usually done in the more arid Southwest, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, and even in the desert with a couple inches of rain a year, they're still polluting groundwater. So imagine that sort of industrial activity right at the edge of a place where it rains and snows kind of a lot, and on major waterways that flow directly into the wilderness, and it's a recipe for disaster. So our campaign is built up to try to prevent this mine from happening. This is just a basic slide just to show, because a lot of people that don't know the area specifically kind of equate water flow with Minnesota as either the Mississippi, where everything flows to the Gulf, or to Lake Superior. But in this edge of the state, all the surface water actually flows north. And so it just shows why that sort of mining activity in that area would be a disaster. And this is a picture of actually the mine site, of the potential mine site itself. This doesn't look like the greatest spot, in my opinion, for a giant industrial mine with a huge river running straight into the wilderness. So this is kind of the potential for what we're facing, what we're trying to prevent. Yeah, that's where it is. All right, so this is me, right at the top of the wilderness sign on the tree right there. About to enter the wilderness is on the border route trail, which starts where the Superior Hiking Trail terminus is, and the border route heads north and goes up along Canada. So I think the way I kind of structured this talk was going through the various trails in the wilderness. I spent about 2 years running every trail of 20 miles or longer. A lot of these trails are set up for backpacking, camping along the way, and just kind of keeping going, and I instead wanted to run them. The reason being is to bring our campaign to a new audience of people that can learn about this issue. Our campaign kind of has a history of what we call adventure advocacy, where people do kind of adventurous pursuits as a way to draw new attention to the wilderness. The marquee example is, if anybody's followed our campaign for any length of time, you may have heard of Dave and Amy Freeman, who they lived in the wilderness for an entire year, where they set off on the fall equinox, and it was a leap year, so they got a bonus day, and came out on the fall equinox the next year. And as part of our campaign for that year, we had one staff dedicated to keeping Dave and Amy alive, where we had to, because they wouldn't leave the wilderness, so we had to bring in food every 2 weeks for them. In the winter, we had to change out their canoe for a dog sled team, and in the spring, vice versa, etc. And so I was kind of thinking, I love trail running. I've been doing this for a while. What can I do to, on my spare time? And so just researching into it, there's all these amazing trails in the wilderness, and just decided that I would give this project a shot. So the first one is the Border Out Trail, which again at the Superior Hiking Trail's terminus heads northwest along the U.S.-Canadian border, as the name might suggest. It's 65 miles, 1,200 feet of elevation gain. When I've talked to people around the Midwest, even the country about this, people are like, that's crazy. I mean, it's about the same amount of vert from base camp to summit of Everest, and the Superior 100 has roughly the same amount. So we all know in this area of the country, I mean, it's not like the Mountain West where you can have buttery single track going up for a couple miles of elevation gain. This is a death by 1,000 cuts, and it's just going to destroy your legs over time. Very much so with the 65 miles of the Border Out. The first time I ran it, I picked June of 2019. It just so happened to be the hottest day of the year, which we'll get into a little bit later. I didn't know that at this time, so we set off just a little bit before sunrise. Running through Patagonia, who's been sponsoring our campaign, or supporting our campaign for a while, partially sponsored my run, and sent a photographer along with, and then put up a bunch of stuff about social media. So again, this is just a way for my run to reach a new audience. So the Patagonia Trail Running Division has been really good about posting stuff on their social media and doing calls to action for us. So just a couple pictures from there. We got some moose prints, nice scenic views. That picture is only like 7 miles in and already full of mud, which is a good trail run. The big thing too, people always asking, like, how do you run by yourself for 60 miles or more, and not have to carry everything with you? And that's the great thing about the wilderness, is the water is literally so clean and pristine, you can drink it straight from the source. Oftentimes, and most of the time in my case, without a filter, which is completely unique. One of the great geologic aspects of the Boundary Waters is that it is the top of the watershed. All the water that is there has fallen from the sky and flows out from there. So it hasn't picked up any agriculture runoff, any industrial pollution, any salt from roads or anything. It's all just straight from the sky and interacting with the environment. So it's just a picture and then kind of a sort of ad for my partial sponsor. The wildlife you can see is pretty incredible. It's just running along. There's like one runnable section of the entire Boundary Waters, about the Border Out Trail. It goes for about 2.5 miles between. It's called the Long Portage, between two lakes. And it's really funny. I've never seen a bear in the wilderness itself until I was running, probably doing the most disruptive and loudest activity possible. And I was coming along, and this guy was just munching on whatever he's eating. And so I happened to see it, and then it just right here, it catches wind of me and just bolts into Canada. Aww. Yeah. And so right there was the stream. That river is the border between the two countries. The picture on the right is titled "Trail Running is Hard." This is, if you know the Boundary Waters at all, there's Rose Lake. And then there's the Palisades that go about 400 feet, pretty much straight up a cliff to the top. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's old growth virgin white cedar forest stands, which is really hard to find. A lot of this area was logged off, and cedar was a prized timber at the time in early part of the last century. But this area is probably too steep and a little bit too remote to get to. So it still stands, and it kind of looks like you're going through indoor forest, and I was just imagining ATSTs coming along and Ewoks trying to take them out. But about halfway up, my toe started to hurt, and I was thinking, oh yeah, I fell at about mile 17, and having to dig in to climb up the palisade here really, really started to hurt. And it turns out afterward that I had broken my toe. It was about 90 degrees too, so I was kind of starting to get a little heat exhaustion. It wasn't my best moment. Just kind of questioning poor life choices, but enjoying where I was. which I think a lot of trail runners can relate to. I got to the top, and just another omen, the largest snapping turtle I've ever seen, hissing at me. I had to bushwhack around him because I wasn't about to go into battle with this guy. It was about 40 miles into the run, and you can't really go anywhere. You're 40 miles. I've got 20 miles that way to the first road, or 20 miles that way to the first road. You just got to keep going. So this is the top of Rose Lake, where I was finally able to refill my water. Not top of Rose Lake, it's where the Rose Lake waterfalls flows down. Refill my water. I just dipped my toe. I saw it was very much swollen and red and not doing well. And the photographer, because you can't take commercial photographs within the wilderness itself, he ran to the border with me, drove around the other side, and met me on the other side. Again, I was heat exhausted. I wasn't keeping any food down. My toe was hurting a lot, and my other leg was overcompensating for the broken toe one. So he was coming to find me. I was like, I just gotta lay down. I'll have my lamp on, you'll find me. And this is how he found me. He came up and was like, Alex, I gotta take a picture of this. I was like, I know. There's the hairline fracture of my toe. Lake Superior's nice and cold, so that felt good the next day on the other side of it. So I did that the first time, and then the second time I did it, so that one I actually DNF'd myself and not structured run, but I tapped out at mile 56 the first row on the other side because I was not in any position to do it. The second time I attempted it the next spring, I turned it into more of an advocacy project, so I brought along these signs along the way. That was please save the boundary waters as a message to Tina Smith, kind of along the way, our senator, about please introduce a bill in the Congress. A lot of people can't fathom what it's like to run overnight, so this is just a video that I show of. I really like running at night because you just have a cone and you're just following this one point of light. There's not a lot of distraction. There's obviously not a lot of people, especially when I'm by myself in the wilderness. So it's kind of showing that. So the second trail is the Kekakavik Trail. It's another 40-mile trail where the Border Route Trail ends. Then there's the Gunflint, which is the road that kind of bisects the wilderness as entry points. And then the Kekakavik picks up more or less where the Border Route leaves and heads another 40 miles west, nearby to the town of Ely. It's a lot different than the Border Route. The Border Route is characterized by all that elevation gain up and down, Palisades looking out over Canada. The Kek, while it does have about 5K of vert throughout it, is mostly a lot more low-lying. It's a lot more wet, so you're crossing beaver dams across rivers. Completely kind of different experience altogether, the two trails. So here's just some pictures of that. My kids always are there to send me off and then pick me up on the other side. And on this one, the big wildlife sighting was a giant bull moose. This guy was following a cow that had crossed the trail just a little bit before, and thankfully I had a big red pine that I was standing behind in case I had to activate this as a defensive block. But I was much more interested in the lady friend that I was chasing. So we just kind of assessed each other for a bit, and then it decided to just head on. And again, I hadn't seen a moose in the wilderness until I was running, ironically again. Being loud and disruptive. And so then it crossed the trail, and I went over and just was able to watch the two of those chase each other along the way. And again, this is the moments like, where am I? Like, this is so cool. It's one of the things I love about trail running is you can see so much land, so much, just appreciate the nature of the thing that you're running through. Because, I mean, if I was on a canoe trip, sure, but why else would I be in this moment at this time? It's just super special. Just a bridge crossing. This is some trail pictures. This is one of the things I love about these trails too, is that your bridges are just fallen logs in most parts. There's a couple where the river's too strong, where there are established bridges, but mostly it's either logs or beaver dams that you're crossing. So beavers have helped us out. Another trail, the Sioux Hussar Trail. So if you know the Ely area, there's the Echo Trail, which goes north of Ely and kind of cuts through the wilderness over to Crane Lake to Voyageurs National Park. The Sioux Hussar Trail is located kind of halfway between Ely and Crane Lake, and goes up, kind of a lollipop situation, run for a bit, and then runs around this loop of a bunch of lakes. It's about 31 miles. I, again, apparently chose I have bad luck at this, the really hot day of the year. The deer flies were out, a lot of ticks, and a rough grouse. I didn't get a lot of pictures of that one because the most aggressive animal I've ever had is this cute little ground chicken, where it was defending its babies, and it chased me toward the end of the run, which was difficult because I had to run backward because I wasn't going to turn my back to it. It was hissing and running alongside me, and then eventually at one point it took off and was flying straight at me and hissing, and I had to knock it out of the air with my trekking poles. It was fine. It was a little bit startled, like where did that come from? But it stopped the chase, and I was able to finish my run. This area of the Boundary Waters is again known for old growth. You can actually see the deer flies in the video there, kind of flicking back and forth. It's known for old growth, these big stands of red and white pines that are just huge, virgin, probably 200-300-year-old trees that haven't been cut down. So hot, there we've got the water in my source. I can just lay down and cool off. Snowbank Lake. So there's 3 concentric the main one around Snowbank, about 20 miles, and you can extend it another 6 going around what's called Disappointment Lake, and then another 5 after that, going a little bit further for what's called the Old Pines Trail, which is cool. As I might say, there's old pines, big old trees there as well. So there's kind of 3 journeys you can do just right outside of Ely, Minnesota, to get to these trails that are really special. It's really gorgeous. The main Snowbank Lake is really well traveled. The other 2 kind of spur routes there are a lot less traveled. That's more hiking and going through like a blowdown area of trees that had fallen over. So that in 2016 there was a huge storm that knocked down the straight line winds and knocked down a huge part of this forest. So that's the trail. You're not running, quote unquote, that part very much. And now the Powwow Trail. So this one is on the southern border of the wilderness, kind of near Isabella Lake, near Sawbill, kind of in that area, just up north of Lake Superior. But what's really neat about this one is that the trail is currently still very hard to get through because there was the Pagami Creek fire in 2011, which scorched about 95% of the trail. And so the Boundary Waters Advisory Committee, BWAC, is the association that's taking care of trying to rehab this trail. They've been doing just an incredible amount of work rebuilding this thing. The bottom left is some of the fire area. It used to be a jack pine forest, and jack pine are notorious where they've got these really thickly held resinous pine cones that need fire to open up and spread their seeds. And when it happens, you get this super dense forest that grows up after it. So you see the old trees that are burned, scarred, and gone, but then the new forest is growing up underneath it. So I kind of characterize it like you're literally running through a living laboratory of the forest coming back after a massive fire that just moonscaped the terrain, but nature persists, and here we're watching the new forest come back. It makes it hard to follow the trail in spots because there's another area where it burned like 20 years ago, and the trees that came back weren't mature enough to produce pine cones, and so the next fire came, and now it's super barren. It's a lot of rock cairns that you have to follow along the way for that part of it. But it's an adventure, as always. There's the 5%, looks like this. This is what it used to look like. They call it the green zone that was left unburned. And then you get back into the burned down part again with the new forest coming back. And this would be part of the trail. So the Boundary Waters Advisory Committee that has to do this are really going through a lot of work because every year they clear sections of the trail, but then there's all these dead pines that are standing, and as those weaken over time, the wind's blowing them down, heavy snowfall is toppling them, and so they clear a section, and then a year later they got to clear it again. So the trail maintenance crews, and I love that you guys donate to Superior Hiking, the association as well, because they're constantly maintaining that trail. These people, I mean, I think it's something like if you are on a mile of trail, they've spent weeks clearing just that trail, that mile by itself. So we owe them a debt of gratitude for all these amazing places that we get to pursue our insane hobbies of running and running and running. So this is me running the Powwow Trail. It's more like a CrossFit workout. Just mumbling to myself. So there's this like 5-mile stretch of this. It took me about 2 hours across because it was just this for a very long time. It was making no PRs, and so this is the kind of the segment as it stands at 2020. When I ran it in 2020, the lower half was all green, and all the tree falls have blocked that again. So they cleared that, they're rounding the corner, they're making the rest of it, and now they have to go back to that. So this is kind of a demonstration of how much work it's going to take to get this trail system back up and running. And I was doing all this in service of my eventual project to do the Boundary Waters Traverse. I was the first person to do this in recorded history of combining the Border Up and the Kekakabek trails into one run, spanning roughly like 110 miles. And I did that in May last year in 38 hours, 15 minutes, and 3 seconds, but it was coming. As a way to bring awareness to this. And so it was just kind of the capstone of all my Boundary Waters running to complete this project. And working with Patagonia, I've been connected with Claire Gallagher. She's one of the top runners in the world living out of Boulder. She just won Leadville this summer, for example. Previous to this run, she had run and won Western States. And so she was out, another runner, Kyle Piatari. The other woman next to Claire on the left is Peyton Thomas, who came out. So it was just a way that they could bring in these kind of celebrity runners to then post on social media. They wrote a bunch of articles. Kyle Piatari, who's a top 10 Western States finisher like 5 years in a row, and Claire run a podcast in the lead up to Western States, but they focused all on this. And so it's like this giant podcast, and then they talk about this. So just more and more eyeballs and attention and all this to our efforts throughout all this. The unique feature of this was, since I was bringing in these elite runners, I wasn't just going to be like, let's just run for 110 miles and see what happens, and maybe ruin your career. So I had friends and family paddle in about every 20 miles and set up paddle and aid stations. So they'd meet us on the trail, and some of them had to camp overnight through a thunderstorm, paddling 10-15 miles to get to us from the nearest entry point. And sometimes they'd have this buffet set up on the top, on the overturned canoe. Could change our shoes, get ready for the night, that sort of thing. So the aid station, even for this run in particular, was particularly Boundary Waters unique. This is some of what I had used all this to highlight and draw awareness. So Patagonia, Trail Runner, REI as a thing up. All my FKTs that I established, Sierra Club, Star Tribune covering it. And then there's Claire and Kyle on Guns Runner, New Belgium, which ironically gave me a bunch of beer to celebrate, but I'm celiac and can't drink it. And 2 years later, I still got a couple cases of beer. I should have brought some. For real. But whenever people come up, I'm like, please. And then, nominated for an FKT of the year last year. And then we made a film that if anybody wants to stick around after the awards are done, we can watch the film. It's about 12 minutes long, but it won 2 Webby Awards this year, which is kind of they brand themselves, but it's a pretty big deal, the Oscars of the internet, for online content, and over 100,000 people had seen this around the world, so it's just more people and attention. So I think that's where I'll stop for now. And I think it's also the part of it, maybe after the film or all this hang out, if you have any questions about the Boundary Waters, about our campaign to save the Boundary Waters, I would love to answer them. So thanks for having me. And also thanks for the donation. I know that was coming for the Save the Boundary Waters. So that's awesome. So thanks so much for that.